Paris, the 28th of March, 1757. Imagine tens of thousands packed shoulder to shoulder, clinging to rooftops, leaning from windows, even perched on chimneys just for a better view. The air is electric, the square deathly quiet. Nobles have paid fortunes for balconies. Children sit on their fathers' shoulders. No one speaks. Everyone waits. And then the cart arrives. Inside it, a man, shackled, broken, barely recognizable. His name, Robert-François Damiens. His crime, touching the untouchable, laying hands on the sacred body of the king. What follows is not just an execution. It's a warning, a nightmare, a moment so savage, so meticulously cruel, that even hardened soldiers turned away in horror. This is not a story of justice. This is a story of vengeance. And once you hear what they did to him, you'll understand why even the revolution that followed never dared to repeat it. Stay with us, because this is the brutal, forgotten spectacle the French monarchy wanted to erase. And yet, it changed history forever. On the frigid afternoon of the 5th of January, 1757, Versailles bore witness to a shocking breach of royal security. As King Louis XV stepped out of his carriage after visiting his ailing daughter, a man suddenly emerged from the crowd and stabbed him with a small pocket knife. The wound was minor, a shallow cut between the ribs, but the implications were monumental. The attacker was Robert-François Damiens, a 42-year-old domestic servant with no known ties to any political movement. Even more startling than the attack itself was Damiens' reaction. He made no attempt to flee. Instead, he stood still and solemnly declared, "Let no one touch the king. I have something to tell him." What did he want to say? No one ever truly found out. Under interrogation, Damiens offered a series of contradictory motives, some tied to religious tensions, particularly the Jansenist controversy, others pointing to grievances about poor governance or sympathy for the suffering masses. His explanations were vague, his reasoning fragmented. Whether he was driven by faith, frustration, or sheer despair, Damiens' action shattered the illusion of divine invincibility that surrounded the monarchy and planted a seed of doubt that would echo through French history. Robert-François Damiens was born in January 1715 in La Tille, a quiet village in northern France. The son of a humble gatekeeper, his life seemed destined for obscurity, just another servant among thousands who moved in and out of the grand households of the French aristocracy. From a young age, Damiens entered domestic service, working for various noble families across the country. At times, he even served at the Palace of Versailles, placing him uncomfortably close to the seat of royal power. Though merely a servant, Damiens was far from simple-minded. He was known for his erratic temperament and for frequently losing jobs due to insubordination or sudden disappearances. Yet those who encountered him often remarked on his deep interest in religion and politics, topics considered dangerous in a kingdom ruled by absolute monarchy and divine right. His unpredictable behavior, intense mood swings, and obsessive conversations raised questions about his mental state. While some saw him as unstable or disturbed, others recognized flashes of intelligence and insight beneath the surface. He was a man caught between the rigid hierarchy of the Ancien Régime and the brewing ideological storms that would eventually reshape France. His life would become a violent symbol of that tension. During the reign of Louis XV, France stood at a dangerous crossroads. Once affectionately called le bien-aimé, the beloved, the king's popularity had plummeted as his rule grew increasingly detached and decadent. The nation, already burdened by the costly and humiliating defeats of the 7 Years' War, faced rising taxes and widespread poverty. Common people struggled to survive, while the aristocracy seemed consumed by luxury and apathy. But it wasn't just economic hardship that fueled unrest. The Enlightenment had taken root, spreading revolutionary ideas that questioned the divine right of kings. Philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot challenged the very foundation of absolute monarchy, advocating reason, liberty, and the rights of man. Meanwhile, deepening tensions between the Catholic Church, the Parlement of Paris, and the Crown fractured the traditional pillars of royal authority. The once unquestioned image of the king, as God's chosen representative, was beginning to crack. This volatile mix of disillusionment, intellectual rebellion, and institutional conflict created a climate ripe for radical acts. In such a charged environment, even a lowly servant like Robert-François Damiens, unstable, disillusioned, and invisible, could emerge as a symbol of a society on the brink of collapse. For 2 relentless months, Robert-François Damiens was held in the dark, damp dungeons of the Bastille, subjected to some of the most brutal interrogations in French history. The goal was clear: extract the names of accomplices, uncover a plot, and prove that Damiens had not acted alone. Torturers employed fire, metal, and unimaginable cruelty, hoping pain would unlock a conspiracy that would justify the fear gripping the monarchy. But no names came, no web of treason emerged. Again and again, Damiens insisted he acted alone, driven not by orders or money, but by personal convictions, religious confusion, and discontent with the state of France. This very solitude unnerved the authorities even more. That a lone servant, with no known affiliations, could touch the sacred body of the king was more terrifying than any organized plot. It exposed a fracture in the divine right of kings, the horrifying truth that even the lowliest subject could defy power. In the end, the trial was swift and symbolic. Despite the superficial wound inflicted on Louis XV, the court condemned Damiens to death by the most extreme punishment available for regicide, or at least the attempt of it. Justice, in this case, was theatre violent, vengeful, and absolute. On the 28th of March, 1757, Paris bore witness to what is now remembered as the most gruesome public execution in French history. Robert-François Damiens, condemned for attempting to assassinate King Louis XV, was brought to the scaffold after months of torture. The sentence, carried out with terrifying precision, began with his right hand, the one that held the knife burned with flaming sulfur. Then, red-hot pincers tore flesh from his chest, arms, thighs, and calves. Into these gaping wounds, executioners poured boiling oil, molten lead, burning wax, and sulfur. But the horror didn't end there. Damiens was tied to 4 horses and subjected to quartering. His body, however, proved too resilient, forcing executioners to make incisions at his joints so the horses could finally tear him apart. The crowd, initially eager for spectacle, fell into stunned silence. Thousands fainted. Even seasoned soldiers looked away. Casanova, who witnessed it, later confessed he returned home sick and feverish. Finally, Damiens' remains were burned, and his ashes scattered in an attempt to erase not just the man, but the memory of his defiance. Yet the savagery left an indelible mark on French consciousness and history itself. The execution of Robert-François Damiens was meant to serve as a powerful warning, a spectacle of terror that would reinforce the sacred authority of the French monarchy. Instead, it became a turning point. Far from restoring faith in King Louis XV, the brutality shocked the nation's conscience. Though the king survived the assassination attempt and ruled for 18 more years, he never regained the public's love or trust. Damiens, a troubled servant with unclear motives, came to symbolize a quiet but growing resistance, an ordinary man, striking at the untouchable. Philosophers like Voltaire and Diderot seized on the savagery of Damiens' death as proof of the Ancien Regime's cruelty and moral decay. His name echoed in revolutionary pamphlets as an example of the state's inhumanity. Rather than silencing dissent, the execution exposed the monarchy's fragility and fueled the fire of future rebellion. In fact, it marked the end of an era. Damiens would be the last man in France to suffer such a medieval punishment. A new age was dawning, one shaped not by torture in public squares, but by enlightenment, resistance, and eventually revolution. Michel Foucault opens his groundbreaking work, Discipline and Punish, with a harrowing account of Robert-François Damiens' execution, not for shock value, but to illustrate a profound transformation in the nature of state power. In the Ancien regime, authority manifested through spectacular, physical punishment. The public torture and dismemberment of Damiens in 1757 served as both entertainment and warning. The king's body was sacred, and any violation demanded the most brutal retribution. But Foucault argues that modern power no longer needs the scaffold. Instead of crushing the body, it disciplines the soul. Power became more insidious, moving from the town square to the prison cell, from whips to surveillance. Modern states control not through terror, but through observation, normalization, and self-regulation. The body remains central, but now as an object to be trained, molded, and rendered docile. Damiens' fate marked the end of one era and the beginning of another. His agony was not just punishment, it was a symbol of how old regimes ruled through fear and how new systems would dominate more quietly, but no less completely. Foucault's analysis reframes punishment as a mirror of societal control and Damiens, its final martyr. Robert-François Damiens remains one of the most haunting figures in European history, not because of the wound he inflicted on King Louis XV, but because of the wound his execution left on the conscience of a nation. His lone act of defiance, whether born of madness, religious fervor, or political desperation, shattered the illusion that the monarchy was invincible. The state's response and execution, so methodical and gruesome that it made even hardened soldiers look away, was intended to restore order. Instead, it exposed the cracks beneath the polished veneer of royal authority. Damiens' punishment marked both the peak of old regime brutality and the beginning of its unraveling. What was meant to be a display of absolute power became a symbol of its moral collapse. Enlightenment thinkers seized on the event as proof of a regime rotting from within. Within decades, revolution would sweep through France, toppling kings and rewriting the social contract. In the end, Damiens was not just a man crushed by the weight of a monarchy, was the grim harbinger of its eventual fall. His broken body, scattered to the winds, foretold the coming storm. A new era where no ruler would remain sacred, and no crown beyond question.